Okay, that brings us to our second of 8 parables in this chapter. And we're not going to take that amount of time with all 8 of these, of course. The second one begins in verse 24. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seeds in his field. And while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. So here's our second parable of the wheat and the tares.
We actually have in ancient literature stories where farmers were feuding with one another and actually doing this to one another, where they're throwing weeds into one another's plots of land because they were mad at one another. And what's also interesting is we think we know what kind of weed we're talking about in the time of Jesus. It's a weed that when it grew up, it actually early on was indistinguishable from wheat. And when it became fully mature, if you harvested and ate it, it actually could be poisonous to death. In fact, the scientific name is Lolium temulentum. And the temulentum actually means to be drunk. So people knew that this was a very poisonous seed that would make you feel as if you were drunk, which means you can't control your body and your thoughts very well. So people knew about this. And it's powerful that Jesus uses this as an example about what happens in life, that sometimes there are two things growing up and you can't yet distinguish. Oh, I should point out that this weed also literally would entangle its own roots with the roots of wheat. So if you did pull out the weed early on, the wheat would come with it. So this was a very powerful story for these people to consider, how God allows things to happen in life, and sometimes there's pain and problems. We're like, God, we want you to fix this immediately. He's like, I have a plan here, but we have to let the process play out.
It's interesting to see how the servants propose the solution when they realize what's gone on. And Jesus' response in verse 28, he said unto them, An enemy hath done this. Somebody who is not our friend hath done this, but we can't gather the tares, verse 29, as Taylor was talking, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. So consequently, you get this parable where good and bad are growing intertwined right next to each other, a first indistinguishable one from another. It's not until they get fully grown that the wheat with those kernels of grain develop, and you can see that the tares have no grain that's going to provide us with sustenance that's going to help us. It's going to hurt us. Now you can tell. And he says, so gather first, verse 30, let both grow together until the harvest. So if you've wondered why life is so difficult in our culture, in our society today, and wondering why is there so much wickedness, I think the answer is here. He's going to let both grow together. The sun is going to shine on both. The rain is going to fall on both. And it was Elder Neal A. Maxwell who once said something along the lines of, don't be surprised when the tares start looking more and more like tares as we get closer and closer to the second coming, the harvest, when the Lord comes again. So he says here, gather ye together first the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them. But if you look at the footnote, the Joseph Smith translation changes the order, that God doesn't send down reapers into the field to first gather out the tares so they can be burned. Joseph Smith changes it to say, gather out first the wheat into my barn, and the tares are bound in bundles to be burned. We're not gathering tares. We're sending missionaries, we're sending the gospel out into the world to gather the wheat into the barn. It's a parable. And since it's a parable, there are layers and layers and layers of symbolism. Of course, there's one interpretation that Jesus is intending for us, but all these symbolic applications, you could say, what could the barn represent? It could represent gather them into the covenant of baptism, into the church, the fold of God. It could be the temple. It could be into our families, into our homes. It could be all of these beautiful symbols tied together. The point is, the barn is a place appointed for the wheat, for the children of God who also choose to take on the identity of child of the covenant and disciple of Jesus Christ. There's a safe place. Stand ye in holy places. There's actually a place to be gathered to. We gather to Zion. That's another symbol for the barn. And so then we bind the tares in the field ready for the burning. What is the burning in an end times context from scriptures? It's the second coming. When Jesus returns again, the wicked will not be able to abide the day of his coming, but will be consumed in his presence. They'll be burned up when he returns to the earth again. We now come to verse 36, where Jesus sends the multitudes away, and then he declares the parable of the wheat and the tares to his apostles. So this is the second time in chapter 13 where he's given his own interpretation. We don't have to wonder what he meant by the wheat and the tares. He tells you exactly that the field is the world, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, and the tares are the children of the wicked one. And the devil is the enemy who is sowing these seeds of tares.